Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. In a major diplomatic victory for the Muslim countries, the United Nations Human Rights Council has passed a Pakistan-led resolution on religious hatred after the desecration of Holy Quran in Sweden's capital Stockholm. Pakistan, on the behalf of the 57-member Organization of Islamic Cooperation, urged the UN Rights Chief to publish a report on religious hatred and for the states to review the laws and plug gaps that may impede the prevention and the prosecution of acts and advocacy of religious hatred. Now, during this particular vote, out of 47 members of the Council, 28 voted in favor of it, 12 went against, and 7 abstained. The desecration of Holy Quran earlier, as I already mentioned, in Sweden's capital Stockholm, angered the Muslims worldwide and also drew strong condemnations, especially from Pope Francis, the OIC, the European Union and the Swedish government itself. But the EU, despite earlier condemnations during the passing of this particular resolution at the United Nations Human Rights Council, opposed it. A number of other European countries, including France and Germany, also voted against it. The United States of America also voted against. Now, Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva, Mr. Khalil Hashmi, accused the West of lip service to their commitment to prevent religious hatred. Earlier, we also saw Pakistan's Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, during his address at the urgent meeting of the United Nations Human Rights Council, said, let me quote, "We must see this clearly for what it is: incitement to religious hatred, discrimination, and attempt to provoke violence. Free speech is as indispensable as the hate speech should be indefensible. Our vigor to protect free speech must not lose sight of the imperative to reject hate speech," unquote. Now, after the adoption of this particular resolution that was spearheaded by Pakistan at the United Nations Human Rights Council, Pakistan has welcomed it. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, in his tweet, has said that humanity is better served by a consensus on the resolve to safeguard our shared values of religious tolerance, pluralism, and respect for all faiths, unquote. Let me quickly bring in our panelists. We are honored to have been joined to discuss this important matter. In the studio, Mr. Javed Siddiq is senior journalist. Mr. Javed Siddiq, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by other participants. I'll be introducing them later then and there. For now, we are also joined on Skype by Professor Dr. Anis Ahmad, the religious scholar and Vice-Chancellor of the Riphah International University. Dr. Anis Ahmad, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Javed Siddiq. Now, this particular diplomatic victory for the Muslim countries, how bigger a victory do you think it is when it comes to the Muslim countries fighting their case against Islamophobia on the international level? This particular victory, do you think it has given strength to that collective voice of the Muslim countries on the international levels when it comes to combating Islamophobia?
Yes, I think it's a very, very substantial victory, and this resolution was backed by Pakistan and the OIC members, plus India, China, and some other countries, South Africa. They voted for this resolution and it was passed. And this is a very strong voice against Islamophobia, against these acts of desecration of the Holy Quran. And the message is loud and clear that the Islamic world will not tolerate this kind of attitude and policies by the Western countries, particularly Sweden, where these holy pages of the Quran were burnt and set ablaze. So I think this is an important victory. Although United States, UK, and some other important European countries opposed it, but despite that, this resolution was carried. And that's a big victory for Pakistan. It was Pakistan backed and Pakistan led resolution, and I think Pakistan has lobbied a lot, and the Islamic countries, OIC countries, stood by Pakistan on this, and they spoke with one voice that Islamophobia is not acceptable. Secondly, I think our foreign minister was very clear, and he said that there must be a segregation between the freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and hate speech. And these kinds of hate speeches provoke and incite violence in the world. And I think the Western countries must understand this, that these acts of desecration of the Quran and some other acts which are very frequently witnessed by the world, they are creating a disharmony among Muslims and other countries. 2 billion Muslims all over the world were hurt by this act of burning the Quran in Sweden. And that has been universally condemned, particularly in the Islamic world. There was a huge protest against this. So I think Pakistan's diplomatic efforts have remained successful, and the lobbying was very, very clear, and I think Pakistan has been able to get the objective of getting this resolution passed at this United Nations Council. So this is very important, and I think the world must realize, and the Western countries particularly, who have a tendency of basically provoking the religious sentiments of Islamic countries in the Islamic world, they must understand that this is not going to be tolerated, and this could lead to violence. This could lead, to total disharmony between the West and the Islamic countries.
Right. Mr. Javed will be discussing the possible repercussions of such type of violent, despicable acts. Let me bring in Dr. Anis Ahmad into the discussion also. Dr. Anis Ahmad, how do you think a big victory this particular passing of the resolution at the United Nations Human Rights Council is, especially when it comes to sending a loud and a clear message to the Western world that the desecration of the holy scriptures of Muslims won't be tolerated, and the Western countries need to take some concrete measures in that regard?
Messages do make difference, and I really appreciate whatever done by UN and OIC and other institutions. But as an academician, I believe that a lot of responsibility lies on us. It is not just others. It is we Muslims who have to look critically and find out why this whole wave of Islamophobia, why hate against Islam, why projection of Muslims as terrorists, fundamentalists, and also disrespect for the scripture of Muslims. I think the root cause, in my view, is a climate of distorted Islam exists for past over a century. And Orientalism and many people who are just tourists in Muslim countries, they generalize their observation and project Islam as something backward, uncivilized, and barbaric. And that has become the norm in the mind of the West. Therefore, just making resolutions will not solve the problem. First and foremost, there is need to understand what will be proper methodology of conveying our message. West is based on certain assumptions. Among those is freedom of speech. That's why denial of God, atheism, and even Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, has been target of many unethical writings and movies, and they think this is freedom of speech. Now, if we talk in that language, it will not work. What we need to do is, instead of just talking about freedom of speech, we should look on the issue from a cultural viewpoint. What is culture of the West? How the communication ethics is to be observed in every matter, and for that we need to address them in view of their own culture. Secondly, in view of the economic interaction and possible pressures. If a country realizes that they have allowed desegregation of the Quran, and consequently $20 million of their export are going to be influenced, they can never allow their people to do that. Thirdly, it's not a matter of just economy, but it's a matter of media. Our media, unfortunately, wakes up only when there is a insult done to Quran or the Prophet, peace be upon him. We are not allowing our media to be used constructively, positively, and informing people about Islam as is in the Quran and Sunnah. People know Islam is in terms of popular faith of people. So if there are projection of certain local festivals, people think that is Islam, and that's not Islam. So media has to project real Islamic image, and only then, after a long period of repeated uh, impressions by media, there may be some change. Thirdly, it's not just a matter of resolutions, but I think it's a matter of a social group to be developed in every society. There are people who are sensible, who want to see peace, who want to see respect and dignity in society. And such people need to be addressed. We are not just addressing certain countries and assume that they will take care of it. This social approach has to be properly understood and taken up by not just PTV, but it has to be based on academicians, professionals, medical doctors, engineers, lawyers, all those sections of society which have an outreach in their own area, chambers of commerce. Why it is assumed that a resolution or a PTV coverage of 15 minutes will bring an impact and change the West? It's ridiculous to think. We have to think seriously and then also analyze what do they mean by Islamophobia. Is it really a psychosis, as the term tells us? Phobia refers to essentially those unfounded fears and conceptions which occupy the mind of a person. Now, if West mind is occupying this, what is the reason? How we psychologically deal with this? So psychological solution need to be found, and that has to be based essentially on proper understanding of their language. The language they are using has to be our basis. We think in our own language and our own culture, make a protest and assume this will work. No, it can never work. I think as an academician, I'm convinced that we have to develop a multi-pronged approach with a long-term strategy, not just a few protests, but there has to be every week a forum where we invite top-ranking American, British, French scholars. They interact with Pakistani scholars on social issues, economic issues, political issues, moral issues, and that will work better than just doing one conference on which we spend millions of rupees. Secondly, it's not just only media, but there has to be an effort on the part of academia that we come up with uh, uh, non-emotional, rational, scientific analysis of the phenomena done from a Muslim viewpoint, and that need to be shared in academic world. And we should not think that one or few books will change that world. No, we need to have a series of those discussions, publications, and those initiatives which are going to make ultimately some impact. So this is very briefly how I look at it.
Right, your point is taken. Mr. Javed Siddiq, what do you think the kind of role, as already alluded to the fact that media has got a responsibility and got a role to play when it comes to dealing with this particular matter? What's your understanding? What kind of strategies do you think the media in the Muslim countries could adopt in order to combat
I think
this?
media in the Islamic countries must play its important role of basically disseminating information in the Western world that those people who stoke incitement and violence through these acts of desecration of the Holy Quran, sometimes, they attack mosques, and some, extremists in the Western countries, they have been resorting to other tactics to provoke the sentiments, religious sentiments of Muslims. We, the Muslims, You know, it is the part of our faith that all prophets of Allah, they have to be respected by us, by the Muslims. And all the holy books, it is a part of our faith, our iman, that they are the holy scriptures, and we believe them and we respect them and we hold them in great reverence. So that is our faith. So we need to communicate this to the West. And also, you know, the United Nations has acknowledged the fact that Islamophobia is becoming a universal problem. It's a global issue, and it has been inciting violence all over the world, and it is basically generating and accentuating hatred, you know, among Muslims vis-a-vis the Western countries. So that's very important. I think this phenomena has to be addressed by the media, and the media of the Islamic countries, as well as the scholars, academicians, and researchers must present their perspective and point of view to the West in a very, very effective and efficacious manner, so that they understand the feeling of the Muslims world. And that is so important. And I think the United Nations have already acknowledged this. Only recently, the International Islamophobia Day was celebrated. So that's very important. I think Pakistan and other Islamic countries have done a lot.
Right, Mr. Javed Siddiq, when we talk about the introspection, we need to do something in order to convey the true picture of Islam being the religion of peace, brotherhood, harmony, patience.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about the other side of the picture, earlier we saw condemnations coming from the European Union itself. Now, during the passing of this resolution, they opposed this particular move on the part of Muslim countries. Don't you think there is a double standard?
It is duplicity. It is duplicity, double standards.
So when we talk about the timing of it, it was carried, this desecration of Holy Quran in Sweden was carried out on Eid-ul-Azha. When we talk specifically about the timing, don't you think those people who are carrying such type of vile acts are not sensitive enough to know that Muslims are holding the sensitivity regarding the matter?
Yes.
Perhaps that's why they are doing it in order to instigate or provoke at will?
I believe this is deliberate, and this has happened before that. The caricatures of the Holy Prophet were basically made, and they were so controversial, and a lot happened on that occasion. And the Islamic world, you know, tried to communicate this message to the Western countries and the Western capitals and the Western scholars and you know, writers and media, that this is not tolerable. Religious sentiment should not be heard, because Muslims do not do it. I mean, we in the Islamic world are very careful, very cautious that nothing happens of that type with regard to Christianity or Judaism and other religions. We are very careful. Although, you know, the Western countries have passed a law on Holocaust, and anybody who does something against that law, he is persecuted. But in case of Islam and the Holy Quran and the Prophet, peace be upon him, if something is done by the Western countries and the Western scholars, and this man who did it, 28-year-old Iraqi, who fled to Sweden many years back, when he burned the pages of the Holy Quran and set them alight, you know, the Swedish government was unmoved. Later on, they did say that we condemn this, but when it came to voting for the resolution, the entire European Union opposed this. This is duplicity, this is double standard and double speak. And I think they must understand it, and they cannot hoodwink the Islamic countries and the Islamic scholars and the public opinion in the Islamic world. The public opinion in Pakistan, in Islamic world, is totally against this, and they have stoked the religious sentiments of the Islamic countries, and it is not going to be, you know, normal by these kind of acts. And I think the Western countries must come out with condemnation, and also they take steps to basically frame laws to punish those people who are trying to hurt the religious sentiments of the Islamic countries.
So, do you think the kind of statements that we have seen coming, especially from a number of European countries, including Germany and France, they speak of these freedom of speech? Sometimes also, as a German ambassador to the council said, that freedom of speech sometimes also means to bear opinions that may seem almost unbearable. What does that depict? Although they called it a dreadful provocation, similar sort of a comment came from French, and were also saying that human rights were about protecting people, not religions and their symbols. So do you think after these statements they are going to review the laws and take any sort of concrete measures?
They should and they must. And you know, this is not, this didn't happen only in June last month. It has been happening in West for quite some time. And the Islamic world has been provoked, these sentiments of the Muslims have been provoked on a number of occasions before this. And our message has been loud and clear to the Western countries, Western thinkers and scholars and religious leaders that we are not going to tolerate this. And there has been a universal condemnation of this act of desecration of the Holy Quran. Sometimes, you know, they make caricatures of the Prophet. Sometimes they do something else, you know, to stoke the religious sentiments of the Islamic world. So that's not in the larger interest of this of the global community. You know, it creates hatred. It basically incites violence, and this is not going to make the globe or the world a peaceful place to live.
Right. We are joined by another participant on the phone line by Mr. Aizaz Chaudhry, former ambassador. Mr. Aizaz, thank you very much for taking time out for views on news tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, the passing of this resolution at the United Nations Human Rights Council against religious hatred, that was spearheaded by Pakistan on behalf of the 57 OIC members. How bigger a diplomatic victory, especially collectively for the Muslim world, do you think is, and has it strengthened its collective voice against Islamophobia on the international level? And do you think this time around the West, the European countries are going to take this message very seriously to do something concrete, especially passing the laws to prevent the recurrence of such vile acts in future?
Thank you. Yes, indeed, it is a principled position that Pakistan has taken, and I think bulk of the OIC supports this particular position, and all Muslims are, I think, really incensed and upset on recurrence of such sacrilegious acts by people who do that in Sweden, North, and Denmark, and other places. But I want to caution here to take it as a victory, because if you look at the vote, out of 47 members of the UN Human Rights Council, 28 said yes, 7 abstentions, and 12 no. So when I was looking at those who had said no, almost all Europeans and United States were the ones who said no. Now that particularly means that they are still not going to do what we want them to do. They could have negotiated to make the resolution in a manner that would allow them to act, but they decided not to. So in a way, I feel that this battle is still continuing and will continue. Pakistan will have to continue with its position. I think most Muslim countries will also. But we should be under no illusion that because of this resolution or many others that might come, the West will change their position. They will not, because they have taken a particular line, and I think they are going for it. And that means that we should be prepared for a longish battle with them. It's a civilizational issue now. It's more than just one particular incident. And you have seen in the last 15 years or so, this issue has been there. One incident or the other comes in. And you have also seen that United Nations Human Rights Council has been debating this. But over there also, the only resolution the Western countries have allowed to pass is against incitement of violence. So they think that if something is said which leads to violence, then that is condemnable, otherwise it's not. They don't really agree with our viewpoint. Now, that's the problem, which means that we will have to continue to harp on the point, even if they don't agree, because they need to know that the sentiment of Muslims is very strong on these matters. And I think in that sense, the resolution in UN Human Rights Council is a step in the right direction. But many more similar steps will need to be taken to tell them that in this civilizational battle on this issue, the Muslim world is not going to let you take it.
Right, Mr. Aizaz, we saw that owing to the efforts of Pakistani authorities, we saw the United Nations also passing an international day to combat Islamophobia. Now, passing of this resolution, despite all these diplomatic efforts at the international level, at the United Nations level, if unfortunate incidents of such sort keep on happening unabated in future also, what sort of a plan of action do you think Muslim countries collectively should adopt from there on?
I think we are very weak in the print world and in the digital space. I think we need to have enough writers, enough thinkers to talk about this issue. You see, the real the clash that the West likes to portray is that they have a principle of freedom of expression. And as long as that freedom of expression does not incite people to violence, we are fine with that. Now, we have to challenge that, the very logic of it, through a series of articles that people should write, through academic debate, through seminars, but not just within your own ecosystem, not within Pakistan, for example, not within Saudi Arabia or Egypt. I think we will have to reach out to the public opinion making circles within Europe as well as the United States to drive home the point that this is not a matter of freedom of expression as far as Muslims are concerned, because this is a matter of faith. And in matters of faith, we don't accept your rules. These are worldly rules that you had created, and we don't accept those rules because in matters of faith, we follow what our faith tells us. So you'll have to build an argument which is more convincing. Yes, there are people who like to follow the path of violence, and that also is a deterrent for Western societies, that there is so much of reaction in Sweden, in other countries. But because you are a minority there in those countries, those people who are taking to the street will have difficulties. They cannot win this war against the larger majority. So the answer lies, in my view, is a more solid argumentative basis, a debate that this is not the right path you are following, and that it will hurt your societies as it is doing that, but it will also hurt the rest of the world. I think that argument needs to be made in the West universities and academic circles and public opinion making circles.
Right, Mr. Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, former ambassador, thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Coming back to you, Dr. Anis Ahmed, we saw condemnation coming from Pope Francis also. We saw Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif calling this particular act of desecration a conspiracy to create a rift between Muslims and Christians. Do you think after that condemnation coming from the Pope himself, that conspiracy against Muslims and Christians to create that rift failed miserably?
Thank you very much. I think whatever Pope has said does have a weight. and some people may take him seriously. But in an age of atheism, in an age of economic benefits, I don't think just religious scholars can make a difference. Instead of taking a reactive approach, which we have always taken, unfortunately, we need to be proactive. And that means we engage people on various issues and let them listen to how Islam looks on various global issues to change our image. Our image is that of a backward people who toe the West, who don't know the West. I have lived a large part of my life in the US and Western world, and I know the culture from inside, not by books. And therefore, there is need to have engagement of people. I don't know, in 75 years, how many programs have we done engaging scholars from Britain or France or USA on various issues that are of uh, importance in terms of religious feelings. Religion is considered something emotional, personal, and never having any important role in society. That's how the West thinks. So unless we take a proactive approach, instead of depending on resolutions, there are thousands of resolutions passed. The resolutions of occupied Kashmir, how many we have passed? What's the difference there? So it's good to have resolutions, nothing wrong in that. Statesmen should talk about it. But I think a significant change can only take place when we take a proactive approach of engaging people on issues on our agenda, not responding just to people who are making some efforts to provoke Muslims. The
Right,
efforts throughout
Dr.
this
Ahmad,
period. Yes.
I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. Is it not the matter more of hate speech rather than engaging those people or the people from the Western countries to make them understand about it, because they already know the sensitivity which is related, let's say, not for the Muslims in particular, for any ethnicity or a group of people or community of people. They've got certain associations, they've got certain symbols towards, naturally every human being has an emotional association. So casting bad words or trying to desecrate those symbols or of any community, that comes under the ambit of hate speech. So there happens to be the responsibility, the onus of responsibility on the shoulders of those people who are trying to do these vile acts.
That's correct. That's what we should be doing. We should not just react and show our anger, which is good. We must show anger, but should not feel happy just showing anger. We need to do something constructive at national level. Let me frankly raise the question, how many universities out of 250 universities have engaged students? How many universities have called for conferences on those issues? How many institutions in the country are coming out in a sane, logical, scientific manner and not emotional manner? And unless we do that, we cannot let West understand our position.
But there is a responsibility of every citizen of this planet Earth to respect the sanctity of the privacy or the things one holds dear to himself. And if the other person is not respecting what I hold dear to myself, he is transgressing, he is crossing a certain limit. So there must be a bar. Whether he likes what I like or not, he should have a respect that I like it, and he shouldn't be crossing that boundary. So why don't we consider this whole scenario in that perspective? So if we do hold certain holy personalities very dear, if we hold some scriptures very dear to our hearts, so if we are not disrespecting them, who gives them the right to disrespect the things which we hold dear to ourselves?
I fully agree with you, but you see, the Western mind does not click when we talk about religion. It does click when we talk about ethical values, moral values, civility,
But it talks
social
about caste, it
welfare,
talks
and
about,
unless
Dr.
we
Nisam,
use
it talks about caste, creed, color, or discrimination on the basis of gender. So why it keeps religion separate from all those elements?
You know, all these issues are very much important, and I fully agree with you that we need to address those. But unfortunately, in this world where we are living, do you think that apartheid in South Africa was based on Christianity? No. Do you think what has been done in African countries based on Christianity? No. Therefore, I'm just saying that the art of communication is we understand the mind of the addressee. And unless we address that language, our emotions, expression of truth will be just talking to walls. We need to understand their mind, and based on that, that's why I'm saying engaging them. Engagement means they should be involved fully, not just they listen to us, but we listen to them, develop a common understanding of issues, and ultimately, I am sure, whatever you have said, that respect of dignitaries, religious personalities, and even national heroes, that should be the part of a civilized world. And that's what it means. But if they are not doing it, and we just focus on purely hate speech or purely on religious emotions, then it is not going to make much impact. We need a wider approach, a comprehensive approach, and not only addressing them, but our own people. Our own people have to be educated. Our universities, our chambers of commerce, our lawmakers, they need to be educated, not just a resolution, but there has to be an ongoing campaign for a longer period till we find some outcomes of it.
Right, Dr. Anis Ahmed, when we talk about this phenomenon of freedom of speech and freedom of expression, specifically trying to analyze it through the perspective of Islam, what are the ideas and the injunctions from Islam that relate to this particular phenomenon of free speech or freedom of expression?
I'm glad you raised it. You see, Islam is the first faith, global faith, which wants people to speak up and which invites them. Therefore, the Quran says, let the people of the book come together and have a dialogue with us. The Quran says that you should stand for truth, sidq, and honesty and uh, human rights of the people. The Quran says very clearly that you should not call even the gods of polytheists with sarcastic terms or demeaning language because they will respond to it. Nothing can be more important for Islam than shirk. Shirk is a zulm in the Quran. Shirk is or polytheism is condemned. But even talking about that, Islam does not allow a Muslim to use foul language or insult the stone-made gods. Therefore, Quran provides a framework. The Quran says, and tell Sayyidina Musa, Isabella Fir'aun now tagha. Go to Fir'aun, he has become a transgressor. But then says, فَقُولُوا قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Then you have to use a polite and penetrating speech. It does not say, first raise your fist, raise your voice, show your anger, then talk to him. No. All these emotional approaches are condemned by the Quran. The Quran wants people to understand, and particularly Muslims to respond in a very composed, ethical manner, scientific way of doing things, analysis of the issue, convincing the person, winning the person, not defeating. Unfortunately, the whole emphasis of debates and dialogues has been how I can score some point and show the opponent as weak. No, that's not Islamic approach. Islamic approach is that we talk in a very civilized manner, make no compromise on truth, stand for what the Quran and Sunnah says, present the Islam in most understanding way, but win the person, not defeat the person, win the hearts, not to repel them. Therefore, the Quran provides a very clear outline of how such issues have to be handled. It is we Muslims who need to understand the Quran and then follow it in our communication. The Quran talks about what we call communication sciences or iblag, and tells us you should make iblag with the most beautiful speech, most appropriate words, more systematic approach. Does not say that when you feel emotionally disturbed, just start with loud voice and come up and break things. No, that's all against the Quranic approach. So, in brief, Islam does not want even those who defame Islam that we respond to them in using same kind of language, but we respond to them with confidence and trust in the truth of Islam. Yet it has to be conveyed in a convincing logical manner, so they are able to appreciate and understand, and even they may not confess, but at least they understand that Islam is not violent, Islam is not extremist, Islam does not allow hate speech, but Islam wants people to be addressed in the most appropriate manner.
Dr. Ahmad, the religious scholar, Vice-Chancellor, Riphah International University. It was indeed enlightening discussion with you. Thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Mr. Javed Siddiq, engaging with the people, especially from the West, to convince them that Islam is a religion of peace, and the kind of the method which has been mentioned by Dr. Ahmad already to win the hearts. What's your understanding of that?
I think we have to understand the perspective of the West. The West, for quite some time, is
why do we have to always understand the perspective of the West? Why
because
doesn't the West try to understand the perspective of the
because
Muslims?
they have divorced the religion about 200, 300 years back, and they don't attach any significance to the faith, religious beliefs, because they think they are, anti-religious now, and they are secular societies. So for them, the prophets are not important. And so the places where we worship are not very important for them. I read the stories in the Western press that churches are being auctioned and they are being demolished, and in their place, the clubs and the dancing halls are being set up and raised. So that is their approach. And we must also not forget that sometime back, a few years back, Huntington wrote a book, Clash of Civilizations, in which it was, a theory was propounded that after the fall of communism, the threat to the Western civilization is from Islam. So that is the perspective, and I think Professor Saab was very right in saying that we have to engage them. We have to convince them that there is nothing in the minds of the Muslim against the West and the Western civilization. And we want to make this world a peaceful world to live and a tolerant world to live. And I think the Muslims have not done anything. On the contrary, in the name of terrorism, attacks were launched against Islamic countries. Millions of Muslims were killed in these wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. But still they believe, they think that the world could be transformed into a peaceful place to live. And I think to do that, to achieve peace and harmony at the global level, this religious hatred has to be eliminated. And for that, I think our religious scholars, our legislators, enlightened people, educated people, they must visit these capitals, Washington, Paris, Berlin, London, etc., and convince them that they should legislate to prevent this kind of desecration of the Holy Quran and the prophets of Islam and other prophets. And they need to be convinced that this is making the world unlivable. This is not going to help bring about peace and harmony in the world if they continue with this kind of attitude and policies.
Right, when we talk about the behavior or the kind of approach the European leaders have got regarding this particular matter, we talk about the behavior of a certain leader from New Zealand, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, the way she responded
Yes.
to the kind of massacre of Muslims in a religious place, in a mosque, the kind of empathy, the kind of compassion, and the kind of strength she exhibited at that time in expressing that solidarity and support towards the Muslims. I'm pretty sure nobody would have gone and engaged with her beforehand that how you have to treat a certain religious community if it is being targeted. So why don't the European leaders learn from that lesson?
I think that's very important, and that is an exemplary case. And I think the Western leaders, they did appreciate her when she tried to calm down the sentiments of the Muslims following that unfortunate incident. But the Western leaders, they don't practice these things. They appreciated it, but they didn't do anything practical. Pope has condemned this, and the followers of the Pope, they are not doing anything practical to basically calm down the sentiments of the Muslims of the world. So the leaders in the Western countries, political leaders and religious leaders, must show that they are concerned about it, and they must convince their followers that they should abstain from doing all these kind of things. In the name of freedom of press, freedom of expression, everything is being done to basically injure and hurt the sentiments of the Muslim. That's not fair. And I think by doing this, they are making the world a place where the violence will erupt, and that's not going to serve any part of the world. The Muslims, the Christians, the Jews, nobody is going to benefit from this. So we have to make this world peaceful.
The message from that very example of Ms. Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand's Prime Minister, after the massacre of Muslims in the mosque, what I understand is that is the matter of the limitations, my rights and your rights.
Yes.
So the subsequent legislative acts also after that massacre also speak volume about that no matter which community you belong to, you've got certain rights which need to be protected. And nobody is allowed to just run over those.
Exactly. This is very simple. And when we talk of the Western ethics, Western democracy, Western concept of tolerance and peaceful coexistence, all these things, clearly lay down that we have to respect the religious sentiments of other people. That people who are living with you in your society and they practice a different faith and they belong to a different faith, they have to be respected. And this is the very basis of the ethics that they are practicing. And what they need to do is they should learn and they should try to basically calm down the sentiments of those people whose sentiments they are basically injuring and hurting. And they are not doing any service to the global peace by resorting to these kind of tactics.
Right, Mr. Javed Siddiq, senior journalist, thank you very much for being with us on Views on News Tonight in the studio. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you for watching.